So, good morning to all of you. Good evening, good night, wherever you may be. Today we are getting together again for continuing with our discussion on Raga-vartma-candrika, this moon ray which illuminates the path of Raga. Today we are beginning the second section of the book, second illumination. It's our 18th meeting. So today we will be studying the very first verse or prose from this second section. But first of all, as usual, let's make some brief recap of we would have seen in last class, and a brief recap, with your permission, very brief, I promise, of what we have seen till now, the very first part of Raga-vartma-candrika. But last class we were seeing the last part of the 14th verse of the first illumination of Raga-vartma-candrika, dealing with the section of this fivefold expression of Raga Nuga Bhakti as described by Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur, and mainly we were studying the last three of them, Baba Anukul, Baba Abhirud, and Baba Birud. So Vishwanath started speaking about wearing neck beads of Tulsi, wearing tilak, Gopi Chandan, and so on, and others, wearing the footprints or names of Krishna in the body. And all this is known as sign of the Vaishnav, and this is considered bhavanukul, favorable to the development of one's desire, cherished mood. And also he included in this section the serving of Tulasi in different ways, parikram to her, offering pranam to her, and so on. So all these points were connected with different angas, of course, as mentioned by Rupa Goswami, his Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, that had a lot to do in this case with increasing our awareness of the sacredness of Sadhaka Deha, of the gift that we have received by Sri Guru, and how to properly ornament, if you will, that in such a way that, again, we increase our awareness of what's the value and depth of that. We also share some ideas regarding Tulasi, being, of course, Brinda Devi, representing the Bhakti Shakti Tattva department, and how to properly accompany ourselves with care in the form, for example, of neck beads, not only just buying neck beads here and there or taking that in a cheap way, but understanding the very meaning of mala, which, as we quoted, has to do with a gift and a certain type of wealth that comes to our life. We also even shared some ideas regarding the possibility of meaning of the three rounds around our neck connected to the third verse of Sikshastakam, and Krishnadas Kaviraj will ask us to wear that verse constantly in our neck. And also how to go deeper into all these daily practices like putting tilak, and how to make of each of these names whole prayer directed to specific forms of Bhagavan connected to those names. We spoke about different types of tilaks as well, and about how all these details are not a mere cultural detail, but actually has to do with, again, the ornamentation of a Sadhaka Deha, which in its perfected form will reside in Nitya Navadvip and will be accompanied by this neck beads, tilak, and so on, markings in the name in the body. So that was more connected to Bhava Anukul, which has some subtle difference with the idea of Bhava Sambandhi, as we also explained. And after that, Vishwanath continues presenting Bhava Abhirud, or the neutral elements in the context of Raga Bhakti, for example, worship of the cow, the banyan tree, Mirobalan tree, the brahmanas, and so on. He considers them Bhava Abhirud, neutral or not opposed, if you will, with the potential of becoming favorable if approached with a particular conception. And in the context of that, he speaks about Vaishnav Seva, which has a special attribute he mentions, and that's that it is included in all the different practice of bhajan he described. The first four, of course, not Bhava Birud, not opposite, but Bhava Mai, Bhava Sambandhi, Bhava Anukul, and Bhava Abhirud. And thus, Vishwanath mentioned that's mandatory to engage in Vaishnav Seva, because it's favorable and it's nourishing for Bhakti Bhakti from every possible direction. So we share some ideas about this also, how these items can be connected with Raga Bhakti, cow Seva especially, go Seva, in the context of Raga Bhakti, more specifically for those who have affinity for Priyanarma Sakya and so on. How this Vaishnava Seva is so high, not only for us as sadhakas, not only even for siddhas, but for Krishna himself, who is perpetually engaged in that type of Vaishnava Seva, especially in his form as Mahaprabhu, all this lila in the context of glorifying the position of being a devotee. Then Vishwanath continued, mentioning how all the practices he mentioned above are to be accepted as one's duties, and he gave the example of Yashoda, who gave more importance to the milk that was boiling on the stove than to Krishna himself, who was drinking from her breast milk. And he took more attention to that thing, that the ingredient of nourishment, as we might call poshaka, and the object to be nourished, posha. Also, this receives the name of tadiya seva, which has to do with serving that which is dear to Krishna. So in this context, Vishwanath was mentioning, it's not improper for a devotee, a Raga Marga devotee, to pay attention to those details or engagements that will nourish the primary engagement in bhakti, like Shravan, Kirtan, and so on. To pay attention to those kinds of sadhana or necessities in that context that will nourish those practices. Like, for example, we gave the example of managing the details for a Kirtan meeting. Devotees are there, invitation and beer sent, someone is cooking, but all that is moving around the conception of Kirtan. So that's considered as non-different from Kirtan if done with the proper mode, again, because also we may be distracted with relative details if we are not fully aware of the proper focus on that. And finally, Vishwanath mentioned in the last section that he recalled again the Bhava Virud, the, let's say, detrimental aspects that may go against bhakti, raga bhakti. And he already mentioned some of them, like ahangraha upasana, considering yourself non-different from the object of your worship. He mentions again nyasa and mudra, and meditating on Dwarka and worshipping Rukmini and other queens there, Dwarka Mahishis. He considers them bhava viruddha. We should not engage in that. And also he mentions one more thing that is neutral, which is here in this course, is on other Puranas apart from the Bhagavad. So, of course, the Bhagavad is the main Purana, and if we hear another Purana, it should nourish the idea of the Bhagavad being the emperor of all Shastra. And regarding the other things, we also shared the famous example of Krishnadas Baba, who received this brand mark in Dwarka, and the implications of that. So extending a little bit further our discussion that we already had before. And finally, Vishwanath finishes his first illumination on this 14th verse, mentioning that even though there is no change, no transformation in bhakti, which is consisting of transcendental substance and it's not touched by Maya Shakti, he uses terms like upadana karana, which sometimes is translated as direct cause or ingredient cause, or sometimes it is understood as material cause, and may imply in our minds some transformation in the context of material experience. So he mentions, actually that's not the point. I use that term with one idea, but in the same way that in the Bhakti Shastras we hear the transformations of prem, like sneha, mana, pranaya, raga, nurag, or in the same way that rasa is divided into different ingredients like vibhav and so on. In the same way, he says, I use terms such as upadana karana, direct cause, to make it more easily understandable. So he ends his treatise, this section, saying, may the saintly devotees readers forgive me for this. So Vishwanath tries to make that point clear while closing this first section. Bhakti is transcendental to Maya, even though he used some terms which may imply material transformation according to the common usage of those terms. But only he used them for the sake of better explaining this Raga Bhakti and its subdivisions. So this will be the end of the first illumination, Pratham Prakash, and today we are beginning Dvitiya Prakash, or the second illumination of the Raga-vartma-candrika. But before that, as I mentioned, let me very briefly, just as I mentioned, comment a little bit the ideas that we have been in general seeing along the first 17 classes we already have had. So in the very beginning, just Vishwanath spoke about the difference between Vaidya and Rag, and how the difference is not so much one of external practice, but of inner addressing, conception, motivation. One being mainly inspired by scriptural injunctions, other by love. The adhikar for Raga Bhakti coming to us, lobha, greed, by the grace of sadhus, again, not being something here inherent. And this lobha coming in a gradual way, not just from from one day to another, at least that's not the general rule. And how in that context there are rules to be followed, even though Raga Bhakti is characterized by not concerned with the scripture officially, actually it has every concern with scripture from a certain way. So the example of the milk has been given. If you want the milk, you will get the cow and you follow all the rules and regulations in order to obtain the object of your greed under the guidance of sadhus and guru. In the midst of that, we spoke about the concept of Ajata Ruchi Raganuga Sadhana Bhakti, how to properly combine these elements of Vaidhi and Raga in the beginning stages before Ruchi awakes. We also make some detailed explanation of the 3 famous verses of Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu that Rupa Goswami shares about his definition of the main expression of Raga Bhakti, the main angas, Shravan, Kirtan, Shmaran, following the mood of an inhabitant of Raj. We spoke a lot about Sadhaka Deha, Siddha Deha, how to serve in both. We spent some time analyzing the stance of our Parivar, Bhakti Vinod, Bhakti Siddhanta in connection with Siddha Deha, Shravanam, Kirtan, Shmaran, Lila Shmaran. We established, not us, but we shared how our Acharya have established Kirtan as the supreme engagement, even in Raga Bhakti, and how Shmaran will come as a byproduct of that. The importance of reciting in Braj, somehow or other, mentally, at least, physically, if not. And after that, Vishwanath shares some caution, again, regarding elements like Angraha, Pasana, Dwarka. How can you end up in Dwarka as a Mahishi there, or even in some external section in Golok, if you are not getting free, if you will, from certain elements of Aishwarya as you progress towards your goals. And finally, we ended this first illumination by discussing this 5-fold division of engagements in Raga Bhakti that we have just finished now. So Vishta Bhava Mai, Bhava Sambandhi, Bhava Nukul, Bhava Virud, and Bhava Virud. Saturated with one's cherished mood, related to that, favorable to that, neutral to that, and unfavorable, detrimental to that. So that's the end of the first illumination or diffusion, if you will, if we want to speak in terms of light. And before starting officially with the second part, Vitiya Prakash, just some brief mentioning of what we will see here in brief. First of all, the first illumination included 14 verses or prose. The second part will include only 8. So it seems it will be shorter, but actually the verses or prose will be almost the same length that the first one. It's a little bit shorter, but not that much. And while the first part was centered around what we already mentioned, Bhakti, Raga Bhakti, the difference between Bhakti, Vaidhi Bhakti and Raga Bhakti, its main ingredients in Raga Bhakti, how to express that, etc. This second part will turn its attention especially between the connection, mainly at least between the connection, the interrelationship between the elements of Aishwarya and Madhurya in the context of Krishna Lila. So now we are turning towards the goal of Raga Bhakti, which is Vrindavan, Krishna in Vrindavan. And so Vishwanath in this second part will, let's say, discuss about the psychology, the prevalent psychology in Vrindavan, which are the elements that are playing themselves out there, mainly in the context of Aishwarya, Madhurya, and all these expressing in 2 terms, in 2 concepts that we will analyze today, Muktata and Sarvajñata, bewilderment and omniscience, how these 2 apparently contradictory experiences are co-living together in Krishna and Vrindavan, in different proportions, as we will see. And also at the end of this second part, Vishwanath will turn the discussion towards how sadhaka is progressing through all the different stages and all the things that are necessary to reach finally this plane, this Golok Vrindavan. So there he will speak about his famous statement that being born in the Bhoma Vrindavan, and some other considerations at the end of this second part. So that said, we will share today the first, let's see if we have time for all, but we'll try, the first prose or verse of this second part, which actually will be some condensed presentation of what Vishwanath will unfold in the next verses. So today I won't unfold in detail all the points in this first verse because Vishwanath himself will start to do that from the second verse or prose. So we will share that, of course, and try to unpack some of its meaning, but leave some time for the next verses. So I will share in the chat the first part of this first verse or prose, where Vishwanath will present a very interesting point. So this first verse will speak about the dilemma between the Lord's Bhagavan's omniscience and bewilderment. Again, these conceptions of Sarvajñata and Mugdhata in connection to Aishwarya and Madhurya respectively. So Vishwanath starts saying, Sri Shyam Sundar is always so absorbed in his pastimes with the beautiful girls of Raj who have accepted Cupid as their heart's friend, that he remains completely unaware of anything else, any kind of loss, lamentation, household duties, calamity, fear, anxiety, or defeat at the hands of his enemies. From all these statements, we can understand that Sri Brajendra Nandana has no chance to think of anyone else but Vrindavaneshwari and the others, since he is enchanted by his loving pastimes with them. Who will then accept the service rendered to him by the countless Raganuga Bhaktas who come to him from different directions and from different countries? Who will listen to all of their various prayers, praises, and so forth? So this is a very well-known topic and point presented by Vishwanath here and by other sadhus in other parts. A similar question is also is brought by Vishwanath himself in his Madhurya Kadambini, as well as by Srila Jiva Goswami in his Bhakti Sandarbha. But there they present the question in connection to the suffering of the jivas. So here is a little slightly different presentation. Here Vishwanath is focusing his point on the prayers of the sadhakas, if you will, by presenting the idea of Shyam Sundar being totally wrapped around the love of Sri Radha. Especially remember that Vishwanath will mainly focus his discussion on the context of Kamanuga Bhakti, so that implies especially glorification of Sri Radha and the gopis, manjaris, and so on. But of course he says here Vrindavaneshwari and the others, so we can generously extend that to the whole of Braj. But the point is, he's so enchanted, he's so overwhelmed, as Guru Maharaj will say, by the Brajavasa's love, the Prema Madhurya, the Lila Madhurya that makes him who he is there, that he's not aware of anything else. So the question may be, if he's so absorbed exclusively in that direction because of the one-pointedness of the devotion there in Braj, so if we as Raga-bhaktas over here, if you will, we are praying to Krishna, we are trying to glorify him, is he hearing those prayers? Is he receiving that? Will he reciprocate with that? And so that's the big question that he's presenting. So here we are seeing just the question. Later he will answer that. So as I say, both Vishwanath and Madhurya Kadambini, both Jiva Goswami and Bhakti Sandarbha present a similar point, but in connection to the suffering of the jivas and how God can empathize with the suffering of the jivas. Is he feeling our suffering if we are suffering here? Is he capable of doing that? Because the point is, according to our philosophy, Krishna is not under the influence of Maya Shakti. We are not Advaita Vedanta who may propose that Brahman becomes somehow or other covered by upadhis because of Maya Shakti. This is not our philosophy. So the point is, we say, well, Bhagavan is omniscient. That's one of the points here. Sarvajñata. Sarvajñata means he knows it all, past, present, future. So if he's omniscient, is he ignorant of the suffering of the conditioned souls? I'm for one moment mentioning what Vishwanath mentions in Madhurya Kadambini and Jiva and Bhakti Sandarbha, and then we'll go back here. So of course we can say he's not ignorant due to his omniscience. Bhagavan is not ignorant of the suffering of the jivas, but the point is that he has no experience of that suffering. He has never been under the influence of Sattva, Rajas, Tamas, Maya, Shakti. So the suffering does not touch his heart in that sense. I mean, he cannot be fully empathic because he has never gone through that experience. But it's not that he doesn't feel or understand anything of what's going on. This important point. Generally, we learn some things by experiencing ourselves, but if you have a higher intelligence, you will understand things just by seeing or by hearing. Sometimes that is said. Some people learn by suffering, some other will learn by hearing. So Krishna doesn't need to go through every single experience to understand what's going on, at least on a certain level. He's quite intelligent. So the point is, he speaks about the suffering of the living beings in the material world very much detail. For example, when he instructs Arjuna in the Bhagavad Gita, where he is struck in Uddhava, in the 11th canto of the Bhagavad, he really describes the suffering in such a way that we feel he understands what's that about. He understands that even better than us, who are going through that experience. But at the same time, again, he is not touched by the experience. In modern psychology, there is some terminology that could like depict these two possibilities. They divide empathy into two groups, one called cognitive empathy and affective empathy. So you may imagine which one belongs to which category. A person who has cognitive empathy means that person knows about the suffering of others and may act to help them to avoid that suffering or to deal with that, but such person does not feel their suffering because she has not gone through that particular experience. And on the other side, the one who has affective empathy will feel the suffering because she knows what's that about, because she has gone through that. And that's why in that context we could say that Krishna has cognition of the jiva's suffering, but he does not feel it in himself. And that's why in that context, and again, that's a context of the discussion of Vishwanath in Madhurya Kadambini, he's not granting bhakti to the jivas himself, but he instructs about bhakti. He grants bhakti through the sadhakas, who, like the example is given, who, like someone had a nightmare, and you wake up from the nightmare and still feel what you felt in the nightmare. A sadhaka may be awake, if you will, to spiritual reality, but still remembers what she gone through as a non-sadhaka before. So he can understand the plight of the conditioned soul. It is said that the same way as Bhagavan cannot experience that, even a Nitya Siddha has not gone through those experiences. So mainly, the Kripa Shakti of Bhagavan comes to us through the sadhakas. Sometimes we may speak about Gaur Lila as some exception, in the sense that those perfected beings who don't know what Maya is about, they become so much, let's say, wrapped around the Audarya concept, the extreme mercy of Gaur Lila, somehow or other they get even closer to the experience, to the plight of conditions. So, but that it doesn't make to the idea of that they are going through our experience as conditioned souls. So here Vishwanath again is presenting a similar thing in connection to the sadhakas. If Krishna is so absorbed in the love of Radha as he is, the scriptures say over and over again, he has no mind for anyone else. Of course, when he says that, it doesn't mean he doesn't love Jashoda or Subal, but at the same time, Sri Radha is the main representative of all that bhakti that consumes Krishna's attention. So here we will start to deal with navigate the tension between Aishwarya and Madhurya. Aishwarya, of course, related to majestic of prowess, opulence, knowledge of Krishna's godhood, and so on. Madhurya to not necessarily the romantic love with Krishna, but the intimacy, the informality, if you will, that appears in Braj. And as we already explained, Krishna's Aishwarya is mainly experienced through Vaidhi Bhakti. Vaidhi Bhakti is therefore for the Aishwarya experience, if you will. And Krishna's sweetness or intimacy is coming to us through the practice of Raga Bhakti. And to say that this sweetness represents let's say, the ultimate limit of Bhagavan, of the experience of divinity. Because as we all see, today and in the following lectures, this Madhurya represents the essence, the very essence of the Godhead. And it will include Aishwarya, interestingly, but not the opposite. That's what we will see. For Madhurya to be there, Aishwarya has to be there somehow or other, even in the background and being buried under layers and layers of intimacy, but that will be there for it to be Madhurya. But when Aishwarya is there, not necessarily Madhurya is there. But we will unpack these ideas in today and in following meetings. So again, if someone wants to have a glimpse or more of Bhagavan's Aishwarya or Madhurya, Bhaidi Bhakti, Madhurya and Raga Bhakti is there as proper means to reach a particular goal and experience. And between the two, in one sense, Aishwarya is easier to understand in the sense that it is more commonly related to what God should be about. God, the Lord, omnipotent, omniscient, certain behavior, and so on. But the Madhurya aspect is a little bit more hard to grasp, to enter, to understand, because it seems something else of what it really is. And it's even beyond the normal idea of Godhood. It speaks about God beyond God, especially in the concept of Braja Krishna. Sanskrit concept for this is aprakrita, which means it seems prakrita. Prakrita means mundane, but it's aprakrita, supramundane, while adokshaya, another term, which means beyond the mind and senses, clearly speaks overtly about something which is transcendental, overtly transcendental, like Vishnu, Narayan in Vaikuntha, 4 arms, extraordinary presentation, that's overtly transcendental. Krishna in Vrindavan, as Guru Maharaj will say, doesn't seem transcendental. As we get higher and deeper in our penetration of transcendence, everything starts to become smaller and smaller, as Guru Maharaj will say. From Brahman to Vaikuntha, from Vaikuntha to Braj, in terms of geographics, it seems smaller, but in terms of affection, it grows bigger and bigger. So that's the real size there. So the point is that since Madhurya is particularly difficult to grasp, to enter into the intimate life of God, that's a real pretty esoteric concept to inhabit the love life of the Absolute. So it requires certain explanation, and that's why here Vishwanath will try to establish the distinction between the two. What's Aishwarya and what's Madhurya, and how Madhurya, even though it seems ordinary, includes Aishwarya and more. And that's why it's superior to the mere Aishwarya, even though it seems ordinary. So this requires certain exercising of our theological thought and so on. So in connection to the principle of Madhurya, we'll start today focusing a little bit more in this direction. Of course, in connection with the Raga Marga, because that's the path that brings us to the experience of intimacy in love of Godhead, we must mention this unique aspect of our particular philosophy in Gaudiya Vedanta, which is Bhagavan being Ajita, generally known. Jita priya priyas yati, how is the verse saying? Jivanti samukharita bhavadiya dartam stanestita shrutigatam tanumar manovid ye prayasva jita jitopyasi traistilokyam, says the Bhagavat. Gyan prayasva dapasena mantaiva. Bhagavan, who is generally known as a Jita, which means unconquerable, becomes Jita, or conquered, controlled by Bhakti. That's a unique theological contribution of Gaudiya thought. Bhagavan, Shaktimam, the supreme energetic source, becomes under the influence, the sway of his own intrinsic force, Swarup Shakti, Ladini Shakti especially. There are so many statements in the scripture about that. Krishna saying, I'm bhakta paradino hyashtatantrivadija, I'm totally under the control of my devotees. I have not even the least independence. Prema has that power, Sri Krishna Akarshini, to attract the all attractive. Nahamatma namasuse matsadu matbhaktair sadubir bina, and so on. I'm not finding so much attraction in my own bliss, that in the bliss that I obtain by interacting lovingly with my devotees, the personifications of the Swarup Shakti. So that's a unique contribution in the theological arena, if you will, in comparison to other religions and processes. Krishna being fully subdued by especially the sweetness and the love found in Braja. Again, that's what makes Krishna who he is. Krishna's difference with Narayan is these four aspects: Venu Madhurya, Rupa Madhurya, Lila Madhurya, and Prema Madhurya. And if you analyze these four, the four has to do with inhabitants there, with the Brajavasis. He has a sweet flute, but he only plays this flute sweetly in Vrindavan. Outside Vrindavan, he's not inspired to do so. He has a sweet form, but that form in Vrindavan is carved, if you will, out of the love of the Brajavasis towards him. Prema Madhurya, he has a very special love there. Yeah, the love he's receiving and the love, of course, he's giving in particular level of reciprocation in Braj. And Lila Madhurya. Lila means loving interaction between divine plane, loving interaction between Bhagavan and his devotees. So all this has to do with Braja Krishna, and all has to do with the love there. The place, as Guru Maharaj says, its inhabitants. So in connection to them, that's the point Vishwanath is mentioning here, he's taken beyond himself. Especially, of course, he highlights the position of Srimati Radha, but this applies to different ways and degrees to all the Braj people. So he's taken beyond himself in all respects, to the point that his God identity is totally thrown out of Vrindavan. If Krishna thinks I'm God in Vrindavan, that's his false ego, if you will, ahankar. So by the love of the Brajavasis, especially of the Braja Gopikas, and most of all by Sri Radha, and it's a nice point that we are mentioning today, since tomorrow will be her appearance day, Sri Radha's to me. That's why Krishna is who he is, basically, because of the love of his devotees, especially because of the love of Sri Radha. And Gaur Lila, in one sense, is the result of that. And that's why Gaur Lila is eternal also, because Gaur Lila means Krishna is trying to experience the depths of Radha's bhav. But when he tries to do so, and Guru Maharaj mentioned this point, he's successful at the end in the Gambhira by quoting the last verse of Shastra, and he did it. He's successful, he tastes Radha bhav. In one level, we can say yes, but on another level, we can say, but Radha bhav is an unfathomable ocean. There has no end. So Krishna is perpetually dedicated to that experience. And that's why Gaur Lila is eternal, even though it comes to this world eventually. But you have the Aprakat Gaur Lila Nityanavadi, where Krishna is constantly, eternally dedicated himself to try to continue going deep into that ocean. He cannot find an end to the glories of Radha's love. So the point is, he's so absorbed in that task. That's the point Vishwanath wants to make here. Radha's love is swallowing, if you will, Krishna's heart, is swallowing Krishna's mind in such a way that he's forgetting everything else, becoming totally absorbed in the lila, in the divine rasa experience with her, day, night, not sleeping, and so on. It is said that Radha and Krishna are so totally forgotten of themselves in their loving interaction that their close assistants like Manjaris and so on, Priyanarma, Sakas as well, they are in charge of the arrangements of their love, because they have forgotten themselves in such a play. So they have delegated the responsibility of all the arrangement in the lila to their assistants, because they are totally out of themselves. So that's the point that Vishwanath wants to make here. Krishna is not finding time to concentrate on anything or any other place or any other person anymore. He's Lila Purushottam. Ram is Maryad Purushottam, Gaur is Prem Purushottam, but Krishna Vrindavan is Lila Purushottam. He's exclusively dedicated to the purpose of Lila and certain type of Lila. So with proper logic, Vishwanath presents that question here. Who will accept the service? If Krishna is so absorbed in such a way, who will accept the service rendered to him by the Raganuga Bhaktas, who are not in the Leela yet, who are not even Siddhas, who are Sadhakas, but who are worshipping here in different parts of the world, and who are praying to him, praising him in a natural way, in a sincere way. So where those prayers go, end. So it's natural that such a question may arise at one point. That's the idea here. So that's the first part. So let's see how Vishwanath starts to answer this. How do you say? Quandary? This riddle. Let me share it. I will share it into in two parts because it's long enough to share it in only one part. So that's the first part. That's the second part. So I'll read it. Vishwanath says, one may offer the solution that Sri Brajendranandan's expansion in the form of the Paramatma, who lives in everyone's heart, listens to those prayers. Since there is no difference between the portion and the origin, it is Paramatma who accepts the service and hears the prayers and hymns of the Raganuga devotees. But that will be very much hurt the devotees who are attached to Krishna. What then is the solution? The answer can be found in the words of Uddhava. He says, Srimad Bhagavatam 3:4-17, O Master, O Divine One, when you consider whether or not it was proper to kill Jarasandha and to go to the Rajasuya sacrifice, you called me to you and asked for my advice. O Uddhava, you said, what should I do in this situation? Like a bewildered person, you asked. Thus acting like an ignorant yet omniscient man who needed advice from a counselor, although you are not conditioned by time and space and you are full of causeless eternal knowledge that can be never diluted or lost, by simultaneously displaying childlike unawareness, moktata, and omniscience, sarvajñata, you are bewildering me. So, interesting. Vishwanath here is quoting the Bhagavad, and very special section of the Bhagavad that he will continue quoting in the next part of this first verse, where Uddhava is expressing his bewilderment, remembering how Krishna behaved with him in Dwarka one way or another. But first of all, let's go to the first point he's quoting here, that is, some people may suggest, okay, Krishna is so lost, so absorbed, that you can just pray to Paramatma. He's the Antaryami, he's omniscient, so he knows what's going on in everyone's heart. So for sure you will have some ear that will hear your prayer, if you will some hands that will receive your praise and so on. But Vishwanath is bluntly rejecting that option, because someone may say, okay, again, Krishna may accept that in the form of Paramatma. Paramatma is his partial expansion, Hamsa Vibhav. Is residing in the hearts of all. So there's no difference here. Here's presenting this option here. You can say, actually, there's no difference between the original form of Godhead and its Vaibhav, its expansion. It's not difference. Equal, one and different, but it's one also. So we can try to pay attention to that. That's the possibility. But he says, no, that will hurt the heart of the Raganuga sadhaka. The sincere Raganuga sadhaka who starting to understand what Raganuga Bhakti is about won't be able to accept such an idea, because that devotee is exclusively yearning to attain the grace of his stadev, her stadev, the particular form of the Lord she is worshipping, which is not Paramatma for sure, which is Krishna in Vrindavan in a particular presentation. And as we know, Mahaprabhu himself, as Guru Maharaj mentions, at the stage of Ruchi, he explains that while elaborating on the fourth verse of Shikshastakam, their Paramatma is being kicked out, if you will, from the heart. And Jata Ruchi, Ruchi is getting born there, and the Ishtadev is starting to fully establish in the throne of one's heart. So the point is, Paramatma is not experiencing rasa. Paramatma is, like we could say, with, of course, with all respect, is unaware of the moods of the Raganuga Bhaktas. Paramatma is just impartial, neutral witness of the souls, like sanctioning different activities and dealing with the principle of justice. But here we are speaking about a totally different realm, the realm of mercy, the realm of Raga Bhakti, the realm of Krishna Braj. So again, if we really understand that, we won't be fully satisfied by saying Paramatma. Yeah, Paramatma can hear, no problem. So we should understand that Paramatma is not, rasika. Paramatma is not skilled, if you will, in relishing transcendental mellows, aesthetic, sacred rapture. We then never hear that Paramatma is tasting any rasa whatsoever. He's the witness, again, of the jiva's activities, giving fruits according to the karma bound to his duty in that connection. And it is said, for example, Sridhar Swami, he mentions in that sense how Paramatma is a limited expression of Bhagavan. Limited not because it's limited in itself, but because of the function he has to perform. So in his purport to the Bhagavat, verse 239, second canto, third chapter, ninth verse, Sridhar Swami, who is the famous Bhagavat commentator, he mentions that Paramatma has primordial nature as his upadhi. Upadhi means, like, let's say, acquired designation, sometimes called like limiting adjunct, interestingly. Some sort of superimposition. So the point is, of course, with this doesn't mean that primordial nature or Maya Shakti, if you will, is conditioning Paramatma, as it does with us, the Jivas. Paramatma is not affected. But the intended meaning is that although Paramatma is regulating primordial nature without being influenced by it or without coming in contact, direct contact with it, Paramatma's involvement with primordial nature seems to be an upadhi, an acquired designation, a limiting, again, adjunct. But what's the reality there actually? Actually, the point is Bhagavan as Paramatma, because Paramatma, we have to understand, is a partial aspect of Bhagavan. We should understand always Paramatma in the context of its fullest expression as Bhagavan. So Bhagavan as Paramatma does not manifest the full transcendental elements, if you will, of his intrinsic being. Because why? It's not required for the mere expression of the Srishti Lila. Paramatma is dealing with the Srishti Lila, so he is expressing as much as is required for that, for the scope of that Lila. But Bhagavan is something else, as we know. So what to speak of Paramatma, actually, no? It is say that, because we can say, okay, Paramatma has to do with the Srishti Lila, it's not tasting any rasa, there's not possibility of establishing an eternal relationship with service. But what about Narayan? Narayan is also omniscient, he's the predominant Lord of Vaikuntha, characterized with Aishwarya, omniscience, Sarvajñata. But Raganuga Bhaktas won't be even satisfied even if Narayan is reciprocating to them. What to speak of Paramatma? That's the point. Kaimukti Nyaya. What to speak of? No? Even Ramachandra, Krishna in Dwarka, any other form of the Lord which is not, again, the Ishtadev, Bhavamai, the one form that corresponds with one cherished mood, there will be full satisfaction there. So what to speak of partial expansions like Paramatma and so on? No? There is a well-known example in this connection that is quoted in the Brihad Bhagavatamrita, where Sriman Narayana is assuming the form of Krishna even in Vaikuntha for Gopakumar. Gopakumar is in Vaikuntha across his, as you know, journey towards his final goal. So at one point he had bhakti samskars for Sakya Bhav in Braj. Braj Sakya Bhav, those were his bhakti samskars. So he was finding how to properly express that in relation to a corresponding object. So he arrived to Vaikuntha, and of course he didn't find suitable to be there. And when he saw Narayan, immediately he shouted, Gopal, it said in Brihad Bhagavatamrita, and he ran, wanted to give him a tight embrace. And all the Vaikuntha Vasis like got alarmed and stopped him, say, what are you doing? I mean, are you crazy? What, we want to embrace God? Gopal, why you call him like this? So he felt a little bit discouraged, but eventually Narayana himself wanted to give some support to Gopakumar, manifested some form of Krishna in Vaikuntha. Sometimes that happens. Narayan shows the different forms of the different avatars, and the Vaikuntha Vasis will think, oh, Krishna is one avatar of Narayan. For Janmastami, they may organize some dramatic performance and he will appear like whatever. So Vishnu, even when Vishnu himself, that's the point, showed Gopakumar not only his form of Krishna. When he saw the form of Krishna, Gopakumar was not satisfied because, again, he was not yet in Braj. He was in Vaikuntha. And after that, it is said that Vishnu showed to him the Gocharana Lila, the pastimes of herding the cows, in one garden in Vaikuntha. But he recreated the whole Braj atmosphere. But Gopakumar was not still satisfied because he wanted to see the Gocharana Lila, Krishna in Vrindavan, the Gocharana Lila in Vrindavan, on location, as Guru Maharaj will say. He wanted to be there, nothing by Kuntha and some representation there. He wanted everything in the purely sweet environment, Madhurya, saturated environment of Vrindavan. The gopis in Kurukshetra saying the same to Krishna, no? When he's saying to Radha, we can join again as usual. And she said, but where is Vrindavan? Where is the Yamuna? Where is Govardhan? Where are the forests? Where's your peacock feather? Where's your flute? Where are you? I mean, you are not the one we know. You are Braja Krishna. For Braja Krishna, we need Braj. We don't want Krishna without Braj. We want Braja Krishna. So if you take Braj out, immediately Krishna becomes someone else. Without the flute, without the crown of peacock feather, he has a diamond crown, he has 4 arms, he had a mace in his hand and chakra. So he changes. He becomes someone else if you put him in a different environment, because the environment has to do with a certain type of love. So the point is this, no? So if this is the case, what to speak of a Raga Bhakta accepting or even imagining that Brajendrananda Sri Krishna will hear his praise in his form of Paramatma, his monitor-like feature Paramatma. The answer that Vishwanath is giving here is no way. That's not an option. So he starts solving the riddle and he quotes, Vishwanath quotes a verse from the Bhagavad, spoke about Uddhava. Again, we quoted that there. Uddhava is saying to Bhagavan, oh my Lord, Bhagavan, your eternal self is never divided by the influence of time. There is no limitation to your perfect knowledge, no, full Aishvarya. You are sufficiently able to consult with yourself. Yet you called me, you call upon me for consultation as if we will be bewildered. So we see the tension between Aishvarya and Madhurya. First, he's presenting Krishna's Sarvajñata, omniscience, and now bewilder aspect. Although you are never bewildered, but you did that. No? So, and this act of yours actually bewilders me. So the context of this verse, maybe you know it, but there were some kings imprisoned by Jarasandha who took shelter in Krishna and sent some messenger to him. So at the same time, it is said that Yudhishthira Maharaj simultaneously sent Narada to Krishna to invite him for the Rajasuya Yajna, to attending there. So Krishna was simultaneously attracted in the 2 directions. He was attracted to his own attribute of protected the surrendered souls, these kings who were asking for shelter, but also he was attracted to his own attribute of being Bhakta Vatsalya, affectionate toward his devotees. So these 2 aspects were like struggling within Krishna. So the point is, he could not ignore the kings who had taken shelter in him, but he could not ignore the invitation of Yudhishthira, who had given his whole life to Krishna. So he was in this dilemma, what to do. So he became Mugdata at this point, says Uddhava. Mugdata means like bewildered or innocently unaware. Although possessing himself some big Shakti, this knowledge potency, in his own Swarupa constitution. So he became bewildered about what to do. Should I go there? Should I go this? Like if he wouldn't be able to expand himself. So he called for Uddhava, who is, as you know, his personal counselor, and he asked his advice to him. And they were in Dwarka, remember. So Dwarka is a place close to Vaikuntha in the sense that Aishvarya predominates there. So there Krishna generally appears with 4 arms, exhibiting Aishvarya, Sarvajñata, omniscience. So eventually he's behaving like an ignorant person, just as ordinary, bewildered, who does not know what to do, what's the best, should I do this, should I do that, some counseling. So he's asking from his wise counselor, Akrura, and Uddhava said, I'm bewildered by your bewilderment, actually, because I know who you are. So you follow the point. He's aware of Krishna's Aishvarya, Sarvajñata, but he's appreciating something else at the same time in the context of his being the Supreme. So Uddhava receives this question, and of course, even though he's bewildered, in order to render service to Krishna, Uddhava gave some advice. So he said, dear Lord, I think it's best for you to immediately go and help kill Yudhishthira Maharaj first. But at the same time, no, he was thinking for himself, it is your duty to give the protection to the kings who are surrendered to you. So I think that both purposes could be served if we understand the whole situation, the bigger picture, will say Uddhava to Krishna. Try to see the bigger picture, Krishna. No? Because Yudhishthira is performing Rajasuya Yajna, but that Rajasuya Yajna cannot be performed unless one is victorious over all kings. So there should be some full victory on them. So in other words, the point is Yudhishthira cannot perform this sacrifice without gaining victory over Jarasandha, who was the one who had these other kings in prison. So first, you would have said, we must kill Jarasandha, and then freeing those kings, conquering all the other ones, and all the other purposes will be served automatically. So he harmonized in that way, and Krishna, of course, was very happy with Uddhav's advice, and Krishna said, oh, Uddhav, you are certainly so intelligent. I will do whatever as you advise. Thank you. And of course, Uddhav, by hearing that answer, he became even more bewildered than before. So here Vishwanath starting to answer this question by quoting what Uddhav say. And next, he will quote the previous Bhagavad verse. We quoted one Bhagavad verse here. Now he will quote the previous one who appears in the Bhagavad, where Uddhav presents an important question and its subsequent solution. So let's share that. Bear with me some maybe extra minutes today. So it says like this. Uddhav saying, some people say that in reality you are not perplexed, but you are only acting so, and that though you appear to be bewildering me, I am not really bewildered. However, such an explanation is inconsistent with the truth. One may try to justify such an interpretation by inappropriately citing seemingly relevant scriptural statements, such as Uddhava's proclamations, you are without endeavor, yet you perform karma, and you are unborn, yet you take birth. However, since this context is different, such an explanation is not proper. So now Vishwanath is trying to elaborate regarding the other verse, the first verse he quoted from the Bhagavad, and quoting this other verse, trying to give context to that. So in the first verse we quoted from the Bhagavad, there's these words, Mugdha Iva and Mohayati Iva. So Mugdha and Moha has to do with bewilderment, illusion. Iva means like as if. So both Mugdha Iva and Mohayati Iva means, generally translated at least, is as if bewildered. So if the point here that Vishwanath wants to make is, if you think that the words Iva imply Krishna was as if bewildered, but actually he was not bewildered, and also in direction to Uddhava, Uddhava was acting as if he was bewildered by Krishna, but actually he was not bewildered, Vishwanath says that that proposal cannot be accepted because, if that bewilderment was actually not real, so it wouldn't have been possible for someone of Uddhava's stature, who is the very embodiment again of, he's Shastravid, he's the personification of knowledge. It would have been impossible for him to become bewildered himself if Krishna's bewilderment was not factual, true. And that was a fact, as we saw. Uddhava was bewildered, for sure, more and more. So the point is, Krishna was also bewildered. But at the same time, as we will see, he retained his omniscience. So this will, and this bewilderment will be further, this point will be further confirmed eventually when we will quote, although this was chronologically before of these verses, when Uddhava went to Vrindavan and witnessed the bewilderment of the Brajavasis there, Nanda, Yashoda, Radha, Gopis, the Brahmar Gita. That will be, Vishwanath will quote those sections in the next following verses by showing how was real bewilderment. He was really bewildered by having darshan of such a prem. So the word Iva in those verses, in this verse from the Bhagavad, should not be explained like Krishna was actually acting, making a show of being bewildered, and Uddhava was also making some performance. No, it should be translated that like another bewildered person. That's the point that is made. Because again, if Uddhava was not actually bewildered, I was just acted as if he was bewildered, there would have not been any reason for the point he was bringing in this particular verse we were quoting here, that he was saying trying to make that point clear. Actually, there was real bewilderment. But interestingly, the thing that mostly bewildered Uddhava, or that bewildered Uddhava the most, was not only Krishna's bewilderment, Krishna's mugdhata, but Krishna's simultaneous bewilderment and omniscience. That's even more bewildering, because he understood he's bewildered, but he's God, he's still God, he's Bhagavan. His bewilderment despite his omniscience. That's really bewildering. Try to think about that for a while. So that's why he mentioned in the last quoted verse from the Bhagavad here, he's saying that, oh Lord, your activities, for example, like lifting Govardhan, that's an action, but you are known as someone who does not act. The scripture describes you as you perform no action at all, and your birth is birthless. Even though you take birth, generally you are known as the unborn, Ajja. Although you are time personified, it is said that you flee into a fortress when he goes in the sea in Dwarka out of fear of your enemies. And he exhibited that in relation to Jarasandha. And although you are self-satisfied or Atmaram, you remain in household life with many wives, more than 1,600,000. How much? Yeah, 1,600s, more than them. No, more than 16,000 wives. So the point is, another closes verse saying, all these facts torment the wise and the learned with doubts, implying it's not easy to accommodate this. It's totally transrational, totally achintya. Anantadas Babaji comments in this section, he says that since all these statements, since in all these statements, it is useless to find a juxtaposition, therefore it is not proper to explain Uddhav's words to mean that Krishna was as if bewildered, but not actually bewildered. So again, this is going on in Dwarka. So what to speak in Braj? In Dwarka, Krishna seems himself bewildered on certain level while retaining his omniscience. So how much bewildered will he present himself in Braj? This will be presented mainly in the next verses, not today. But just for a minute, given like a trailer of what we will see, we can recall this similar verse given by Kunti Devi that will be also quoted in future verses by Vishwanath here in relation to Braj and the Damodar Lila. Interestingly, this verse is quite a parallel to the verse of Uddhav. And before the verse that I will quote now, there is also like a previous verse, which is also parallel to the second verse that we are quoting here of Uddhav. So it's like a very interesting parallel section. So in the Damodar Lila, famous verse in the prayers of Queen Kunti, she's saying, my dear Krishna, Yashoda, Damodar Lila, Yashoda took up a rope to bind you when you committed an offense, and your disturbed eyes overflowed with tears, which washed the mascara from your eyes, the kajal. And you were afraid, though fear personified is afraid of you. This sight is bewildering to me. So in this way, Kunti is expressing the same idea, no? Because she has some awareness. She's not a Brajavasi, so she has some awareness of Krishna's godhood, if you will, and at the same time, while witnessing a childlike Damodar Lila, that's really an interesting combination of these two elements of Mugdhata, Sarvajñata. So we have for one side, interestingly, the bewilderment of this omniscient person, the defeat, the fear, as we will see here, the crying, the fleeing away of the invincible one. That's an interesting contrast again. The all-worshipable supreme truth, bowing to the feet of Nanda and Yashoda, carrying Nanda's padukas on his head. Or we find the hunger, the thirst, the theft, and the adultery even of this person who is known as Atmaram, Aptakam, self-satisfied, in connection to the Brajavadus, the wives of the Braj. So all this is speaking about this interesting combination of Madhurya and Aishwarya, how the Aishwarya is still there, and as we will see, it's allowing the real experience of Madhurya. Aishwarya must be in the background for Madhurya to be there. But this is what we find in the Braja Lila. As Guru Maharaj will say, Bhagavan, God overwhelmed by the affection of his devotees, in this case, but the Brajavasis affection. So bear with me a little bit more. We have one more section before finishing, so I want to close this idea, since Vishwanath will unpack all this content in the following verses. So at this point, one may ask, okay, so this mugdata, this bewilderment of Krishna, where it's coming from? Is that the result of Maya? Because we know what's to be bewildered. We know what's to be in illusion, but not necessarily that's Madhurya. That's the point. We will see. Because why? Krishna's illusion is the result of his prem, not of Maya Shakti. We already mentioned that point. He doesn't know what does it mean to be under the influence of Maya Shakti. He does know what does it mean to be under the influence. He only knows what does it mean to be under the influence of his Bhakti Shakti, Swarup Shakti. And so Krishna's illusion is a result of his prem, his Bhakta Vatsalya, his main attribute, which means he's affectionate toward his devotees. And that implies they are affectionate toward him. He loves them so much that in their association, as we began our lecture, he becomes so much captured, how to say, like haunted by love, if you will, enchanted, that he forgets everything else. So it's due to this prem that Krishna becomes not only Mukta, but Sarvajna at the same time. He's omniscient and he's bewildered. And those two apparently contradictory expressions live together in him. For example, when he's engaged in the Rasa Lila with the gopis and other intimate loving pastimes, it is said that if a surrender Raga Nuga Bhakta, real surrender one, worships and prays to Krishna and the gopis in that particular scenario, Krishna will be able to hear those prayers and fulfill that desire. For such Raga Nuga Bhakta, he's hearing everything. So here we are starting to answer the question of Vishwanath, who is hearing those prayers? So this shloka is trying to tell this point. Even though Krishna is absorbed in the Braja Lila, even though that his quality of omniscience, Sarvajnata, remains with him in the background, as we will see for many reasons. We can see how nicely and expertly Vishwanath is presenting his point, and gradually he will expand on the necessity of Aishwarya for the experience of Madhurya. But here he begins in a more shy way, if you will, by saying he can hear the prayers because he's still omniscient. With the excuse, if you will, of the topic of who will hear my prayers, he's actually entering, like how to say, enter with a needle and like a plow. He will start fully unfolding the conception of Madhurya and Aishwarya in the background. So his point is Bhagavan is still omniscient, retains his, even though bewildered, he's still omniscient. So through that omniscient, Hari will be able to hear the prayers of his devotees. But at the same time, we could say for such a, if you want to really get him, such a prayer should be, not because he's in the midst of very intense emotionality in Braj. So our call should be how to say, like wrapped into deep surrender. So that naturally will take the attention of Bhagavan. That's an important, as we mentioned before also, our proper conception, because we may say, I will pray to Krishna in Vrindavan, but if we don't have proper conceptual orientation of who he is, our prayer may be connected to some other direction of the Absolute. So all the things are required, but again, the point here being made is Krishna, even though bewildered by the most intense love of the Brajavasis, he remains omniscient. Let's share the last section, and there will be a short explanation of this because it's mainly the conclusion of Vishwanath in today's point. So I'll read this. I'll share some few words before going to questions. It says like this. In this way, Vishwanath says, we must accept Mukdata, or Sri Krishna's quality of being innocently unaware in his Dwarka pastimes, despite the presence of Sarvajnata, his being omniscient. Similarly, in his Vrindavan pastimes, we are obliged to acknowledge his Sarvajnata, brought about by his inconceivable potency, despite the presence of Mukdata. Sripad Lila Sukha has given us an identical explanation in his Krishna Karnamrita, verse 83. He says, in all his pastimes, the effulgent Lord is simultaneously bewildered and omniscient. Therefore, we must accept this as being accomplished by his inconceivable potency. So in this way, Vishwanath is concluding this section by mentioning how, as we have already seen in the case of Uddhava being in Dwarka with Krishna, Krishna shows himself to be Mugdata, unaware, bewildered, but at the same time he remains being Sarvajñata, or omniscient. So he says, similarly, when we go to Braj, because the original question has to do with Braj and with Raga Bhakti, in Vrindavan he seems overtly bewildered, but we need to acknowledge his Sarvajñata, how omniscience and Aishwarya lies beyond the intimacy of Madhurya there. And he, of course, will explain that in detail in the next verses. So, and he says, the two of them are living together in harmony through his Achintya Shakti, or inconceivable potency. So in the same way that, again, the point is, we have to accept the Mugdata of Krishna even in the presence of his Sarvajñata in places like Dwarka. Similarly, we are obliged to, forced to recognize that in Vrindavan, the Sarvajñata of Sri Hari will be all existent, even though that Sarvajñata, that Aishwarya, will be predominated, defeated, if you will, by his Mugdata. But the two of them coexisting in different proportions along the different pastimes of Bhagavan. Next verses, Vishwanath will quote different pastimes of Vrindavan and how these two elements are playing out. But the point that Vishwanath wants to make is all these apparent contradictions actually bring Krishna's Achintya Shakti to perfection. Agatana Shakti means, which makes the impossible possible. That's only possible for the Achintya Shakti. And since Bhagavan has Achintya Shakti, that Shakti has to exercise itself. And the way that Achintya Shakti will exercise is bringing contradictions to perfection. If you will, making contradiction non-contradictory, making something that we may think is not possible to coexist possible. So finally, Vishwanath finishes his first verse by quoting Lila Sukha, who is Bilba Mangala Thakur, and one verse from his famous Krishna Karnamrita, which he says again, when Krishna's pastimes, he implies when Krishna's pastimes show simultaneously omniscient and bewildered condition, this is the perfection of his inconceivable potency. So he gives some Shastra Praman for support of this idea of the perfection of the Achintya Shakti. Basically has to do with this harmonizing of Aishwarya, Madhurya, Sarvajñata, and Mugdata. Because again, remember, Krishna sometimes is defined as the shelter of all contradictions. In him, everything becomes possible. That's actually one of the meanings, if I'm not mistaken, that Jiva Goswami, he defines the word Braj as that place where everything is possible. And we dream with a place like this being here. We dream with something, everything is possible. Of course, everything in certain particular parameters and context, but at the same time quite impossible, become impossible. And also this Mugdata, again, this bewildered condition is the very soul, it is described of this Madhurya Lila, of the intimate pastimes of the Godhead in Vrindavan, which are the goal of the Raga Bhakti, and which are also the very essence of Krishna's own Ladini Shakti. So this will be further explained in the further verses. So I won't enter into more detail because again, all the things will be duly unpacked in the following section. So I'll rest my case here. So thank you so much for your time, patience, and attention. And of course, if you have any question or commentary or doubt, we may spend some minutes, some extra time in that. So you tell me in just such a case. Okay, it seems you became Mugdata. You became bewildered by the topic. Bring some questions. Jai,
Can I ask something from the previous text, because I wasn't able to participate that time?
Previous class, previous lecture?
Yeah.
Yes, of course.
Thank you. Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur twice mentioned mudra and these other things that are not favorable. And at least I haven't looked at Shlanaraya Maharaj commentary, but Anantaras Babaji, he understands mudra the first time to refer to these hand gestures. He gives a list of a few of them.
Mm-hmm.
And the second time he seems to understand mudra to refer to brands.
To what are brands?
Brands. Vishwanath Chakravarti actually doesn't specify either one.
Mm-hmm.
So which one is it?
Well, I will say that brands, I remember because I read that commentary, of course, and at least in the translation, they speak about mudras on one side and branding like a separate thing.
No, but mudra is one name for meaning of mudra is brands, and this is described in some texts.
Mm-hmm.
And I could easily understand that this is contrary to Raganuga Bhakti, because the brands are brands of Vishnu's weapons.
Mm-hmm.
So this could easily be understood that this will not be favorable for thinking of yourself as a servant of Shri Shri Radha Krishna.
So maybe your main question will be, maybe in the first time he speaks about mudras, maybe he referring to those brands as the main unfavorable expression of the term, something like that?
Well, I'm thinking actually if that is in both cases what he's meaning.
Yeah. Well, it's
possible.
Again, it's not fully resolved there, and nobody's making a very clear statement, because again, in the first time, as you mentioned, the commentators speak of mudra mainly as regarding hand gestures, and in the second one they will mainly focus, as you mentioned, the word has a second meaning application regarding the branding. And even we share one pastime regarding one Krishnadas Baba who was branded in Dwarka, and of course that didn't allow him to enter Braj again. So he was invited to go there and reside with the queens in Dwarka. So, but of course that was also connected to his going to Dwarka and the meditation in Dwarka that is also mentioned as viruddha or unfavorable. But yeah, that's a possibility. Maybe we are getting close to solve the riddle of Nyasa and Mudra. But again, the commentators are not being clear in that. Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur also, as you mentioned, is not fully clear in that. So I will say that, I mean, it can apply regarding the branding. It will apply, of course, as you say, if you have a Dwarka branding or Vishnu Mark branding, that won't be anukul for Raga Bhakti. And if you over engage in mudra regarding hand gestures, getting excessively attached to something that will be more fitting for Sri Sampradaya performance, if you will, that won't be favorable for Raga Bhakti as well. So I will see the term and the unfavorability of the term applicable in these two possibilities according to the meaning of the word. So I will say that.
Thank you. Can I ask a short follow-up on that?
Yes.
What would you think about then tattoos? Because it's a little bit like mudra in the second sense, and many tattoos that devotees are taking.
You refer to emotional tattoos?
Yes, of course.
Okay.
Because we're speaking about bhakti, and many devotees have tattoos of like Nishingadev or such majestic things.
Yeah. Well, there's some devotees have tattoos of Krishna in Vrindavan as well, even though it may sound a little bit rasa basa, but they have the tattoos regarding Aishwarya and regarding Madhurya. And yeah, I remember once I was thinking about, or maybe I did, I wrote to Guru Nishta because he makes this going back home series. I was thinking maybe he may do some joking regarding this, the sadhaka having some tattoos of being concerned about, in Nitya Navadvip, if I got totally spiritualized in this lifetime, what will happen with the tattoos in my body? Will I have my tattoos in Nitya Navadvip or not? Like himself being mainly concerned with the idea of he wants to have them there. Of course, he won't be totally free if he has that concern yet. But yeah, that will be a contemporary purport to this type of sections, because at that time I don't think that was the fact, even though we have heard that in India they have some tattoos as well. They tattoo, there's this sect of the followers of Sri Ramachandra that have the whole body tattooed with Ram Nam, this famous pastime. Even in the Ram Lila, I think you know that one, that Gurmash had told that this person, I don't remember his name, maybe you may recall, but Ram was about to kill him and he was pointing to him but throwing the arrow, but his body was full of Ram Nam. So he said, I cannot throw at him. Okay, so the only place that there's no tattoo is in the tongue. So throw your arrow there. He said, but his tongue is constantly chanting Ram Nam. So even though there's no Ram Nam there is Ram Nam there. So I cannot kill him there. So I don't know how eventually they find out some part of for killing him. It was in the context of the Lila. Eventually he was not a demon, but we have these instances even from the time of Ram Lila. So it's not only a contemporary thing, but I understand that you may mention devotional tattoos more in the context of how devotees may approach that. And of course, that's not an angle of Raga Bhakti. And I will say that as much as you progress in Raga Bhakti, even if you may have some necessity, let's call it some feeling of, I want to have a tattoo, I will say that as much as you progress in Raga Bhakti, that desire should be over. I mean, it's a fact. I mean, if you say, no, I'm progressing so much in my Raga Bhakti that I want to feel my whole body with the whole Braja Lila from chapter 1 to 33 of the Rasa Lila, and each limb of my body will be a chapter, you are not really getting what's Raga Bhakti about. So there may be a place, as you mentioned, for some devotees still like having some scar from pre-devotional life, because that's a fact. I mean, it's not like I will tattoo Nrsimha Devi my whole back, and that's a must. I mean, you can tattoo Nrsimha Devi in your heart by proper understanding who is he, and by proper invoking him and understanding that he's your protector regarding selfish desire. That's the main thing, because that's another whole topic. No, devotees praying to Nrsimha Dev for protection. Which protection? Which type of protection? Protection from myself, actually. So again, in the beginning, some scar from previous devotional life may be there, and we make some mixing, and we have some devotional tattoos, like devotees saying, okay, I won't hear any more music from material world, but I'll start hearing devotional rock music with mantras. So I'll say, well, okay, there are many topics related to that, but strictly speaking, as you progress in Raga Bhakti, that affinity should be also get diluted more and more, because again, it's not that I will go to the Nitya Lila and everyone will be playing heavy metal and punk rock there, because Braja means the place where everything is possible. No, that doesn't. It's like that. It's in the context of Tattva and Siddhanta and Rasa. Many things are possible, unlimited in that context. So gradually we should get purified from certain, our chitta should get cleansed of certain material, some scars, and we will get some affinity in the proper direction. So again, it's not forbidden, and a devotee, in the beginning, or devotee may feel still the necessity of expressing his like beginner's faith in a way of, I will cover my Jimi Hendrix tattoo with Nrsimha Dev tattoo, and say, okay, I appreciate that. But eventually, that necessity should be replaced by some other inner necessity, no? Because I mean, if you really understand what's a sadhaka deha, I will say again, I don't want to sound fanatical, especially if any of you are projecting to visit a tattoo shop soon, but I mean, sadhaka deha is not your body anymore, it's Guru's gift. So how to treat that gift? We have been reading, decorate that with certain items, neck beads, tilak, gopi chandan, and engaged the senses for the pleasure of the Lord of the senses. But tattoo implies some type, at least generally, it's more connected to Rajaguna, at least, not some identification with the body and wanting to have that in my body. Generally, it's not that connected to a depth of appreciation of the sadhaka deha. Again, I'm not condemning that. I have tattoos, not with the devotional period, but pre-devotional period. So that's why I asked Brigopad, hopefully that doesn't count in this sense. what to do. Hopefully, as I progress, they make God dissolve in my body or whatever. I don't think I will be accepted in the higher realms with that, so I may require some lifetimes yet. But again, after knowing Vaishnavism, Gaudiya Vedanta, we know that tattoos are not an anga of bhakti. So there may be something that can be accommodated for a time, but we shouldn't make that of an excuse to further our I mean, it's a matter of sincerity, no? To sincerity according to your present situation, how much you can deal with that, with your devotional life without being tattooed, if you will. And as much as you get a taste for real bhakti and go deep in raga bhakti, naturally you will not even think about that. I mean, the idea will just disappear from your mind because so many other thoughts will be preoccupying you. So I think there's a place for that in certain stages, in the sense that if you say to some devotee, you cannot do that, that will be unfavorable, that devotee may even leave practice altogether. So in that relative consideration, there may be some place for that, but in the ultimate consideration, eventually that should be surpassed. So a more contemporary relative topic, but it's important because those topics are there in the life and minds of many. So thank you for the follow-up question, Bigupa. Okay, so I think if there are no other questions before finishing, we can.
I have one question.
Okay, one more question and we finish here. Yes.
Maharaj, Hare Krishna Maharaj.
Jai.
Maharaj, you said that uh, the Gopi Kumar is in Vaikuntha. It's like I heard that like Gopi Kumar also available in Vaikuntha, or they
Gopa.
are
I was
Gopa Kumar. Sorry,
Gopa Kumar. So what's your question?
Like in Vaikuntha, who are the normally Gopa Kumar? By meaning, it is show they are Golok Vrindavan. But how, like, who is there available in Vaikuntha? Like, a little bit.
I cannot hear the question very clearly, to be honest. The audio is not so good, so I cannot grasp what's the question. I don't know if someone is hearing better than me.
Yeah, Maharaj, you able to hear my voice?
Yeah, it gets like interrupted. The audio gets interrupted a little bit.
Yeah, maybe network issue. Maharaj, I have one question that Gopa Kumar also available in, like they are also present in Vaikuntha Loka?
No, Gopa Kumar is not present in Vaikuntha Loka. Gopa Kumar has visited, if you will, Vaikuntha Loka, because Brihad Bhagavatamrita is the description of the journey of Gopa Kumar. So he's going through different stages, if you will, different platforms, different places, and eventually arriving to his final destination. Of course, that journey of Gopa Kumar is not necessarily the same journey we will have. It's not that we will have to go to Vaikuntha, to Ajodhya, to Dwarka, as Gopa Kumar did, to every single place. But Sanatana Goswami is using that device in his narrative, trying to illustrate which are the different spheres of transcendental reality, or even non-transcendental reality, and of course penetration into transcendence as well. So Sanatana Goswami is using the journey of Gopa Kumaras to show all the different possibilities, but also to establish the supremacy of the achievement of Vrindavan, which was Gopa Kumar's desire from day one. I mean, it's not that he was interested in something else. From day one, he received Bhakti Samskars for Sakya-rasa in Vrindavan, so he started that journey trying to find that place, if you will, the place that corresponds is. So Gopa Kumar is mainly a character, if you will, that Sanatana Goswami is using, if you will, in his Brihad Bhagavatamrita. No? So it's not speaking about Gopas in general, or Gopis, as we heard, the ones who inhabit Vrindavan. No? But Gopa Kumar is the main character of this narrative of Sanatana Goswami's Brihad Bhagavatamrita, which he's using again to illustrate for us all these different possibilities in transcendence. But it's not that there are Gopis and Gopas in Vaikuntha and in Ajodhya and in Dwarka and in other places. No, Gopas and Gopis are in Gokul, in Golok, no? in their place, if you will, in the place of the Go. So Gopa Kumar, again, he started from planet Earth. He made this journey and eventually got to his final destination. That's in brief words, of course. For more details, we should go into the whole Brihad Bhagavatamrita, which is a very recommended adventure for sure. So, okay. So I
Thank you,
think we,
Maharaj.
no, thank you. So I think we can finish here. If there are any other questions, maybe we can leave that for next class, since it's a little bit late already and we have gone through some topics. So giving you some time for digesting. So thank you very much to all of you for your time, patience, as we will meet each other next Thursday. Srila Gurudev ki jai, Shriman Mahaprabhu ki jai, Shri Harinam Sankirtan ki jai, Shri Raga-vartma-candrika ki jai, Shri Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur Pad ki jai, Gaur Bhakta Vrinda ki jai, Gaur Premananda Haribo, Vanchakalpatarubhyascha Kripa Sindhubhya Vacha, Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha.